By Mortgage Right. I'm your host, John Saranitas. As always, I'm joined by my partners, Kevin Stone and Adam Kirkchin. And tonight we are joined by Patriot.com's Evan Lazar. Evan, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well, guys. How are we doing?
Good, good.
Doing good, man. Thanks for joining us.
Of course,
Good, doing
anytime.
well. Marathon Monday. Red Sox get shut out 6-0. Got a chance to watch some of the runners up at Natick today. So, I guess it was a good day off. And of course, other big story of the day is Michael Penix is in town. Want to get your thoughts on that. But before we do that, I do want to remind our viewers and listeners that if you are looking to sell your current home or purchase your first home, give Herb Devine a call at 781-254-2846 or shoot him an email at herb@mortgageright.com. With 27 years of experience, Herb has the necessary experience and background to help you get into a program to purchase your next home. Again, if you are ready to make that jump, give him a call at 781-254-2846 or shoot him an email at herb@mortgageright.com. He and his team are available anytime, including nights and weekends. All right, gentlemen. Evan, I'm going to start there. Of course, we got the news this evening that Michael Penix is in town to meet with the Patriots today, and he's scheduled to work out tomorrow. Does that surprise you? Thoughts on that news?
No, it doesn't surprise me. I think it would have been a little bit, I don't know what the right word is. I would have been a little bit disappointed if they hadn't done some homework and done their due diligence on Michael Penix. I just feel like there can't be a stone that goes unturned in this process. And he's definitely in the conversation, at least in a trade down scenario, maybe at number 34 at the top of the second round, that if things fall a certain way or you get a call from Minnesota on draft night and they offer you 4 first-round picks and Justin Jefferson and you trade out of the pick, then there's a world where Michael Penix becomes an option for the Patriots. So I was surprised that they hadn't done as much homework on him already. It seemed, at least in the public eye. Now, I know that their pro day, I'm trying to remember, I think it was North Carolina that had a conflict with Washington. I think those pro days went on the same day. And so you couldn't be two places at once. They sent Cam Williams, a college scouting director, out to Washington. And then Gerard Mayo and Elliott Wolf went to North Carolina in Chapel Hill for Drake May's pro day. So I get why they prioritize May in circumstance, but to not have Penix in and at least talk to him, obviously do a medical recheck with him as well, seems like it would have been a little bit of an oversight for the Patriots.
Evan, you said the two magic words there, trade down. I have been team trade down for a while now.
I like that.
Just your thoughts on the entire process. And for me, it's just you have too many holes to think, plugging a quarterback in right away ultimately solves everything. And now I know you need a guy and all that, but I'm a fan of, ultimately building it the slower way and stockpiling those picks. Where do you stand on just the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a Drake May guy from the jump, and I do see the talent with Jaden Daniels as well.
Making two guys on here that are Drake May guys, Evan.
Yeah. So I definitely look. I was in North Carolina for Drake May's pro day, and I was standing on the sideline, field level, during his throwing session. And the ball just absolutely jumps out of his hand. It's hard not to fall in love with that type of arm talent and the physical ability that he has, especially at his size. That's the prototype. And I think one of the things that we have seen in New England as well is that you got to be able to drive the ball through the weather here in Foxborough. And that's not necessarily something that I've put a ton of stock into in the past, but now watching Mac Jones, watching Bailey Zappi, watching the Patriots go up to Buffalo and only throw the ball 3 times because Mac Jones doesn't have the arm to cut it through the wind. You start to think about those things a little bit more. So I look at the trade down scenario though, and I definitely see the logic in it, especially if you can get those double ones from Minnesota. I think that's awfully appealing because you get 2 first-round caliber players this year. It's not like you're kicking the can down the road to 2026 or something like that and waiting on all those picks. You get those 2 first-rounders this year. Maybe one of them turns into one of these tier 2 quarterbacks like a Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr., and then you get a receiver or you get one of the tackles, something like that. So I totally understand the logic in the trade down. I would just say this time last year, would we have looked at the Houston Texans roster and been like, wow, this is a playoff Super Bowl caliber roster? And a year later, now players are flocking to Houston because of CJ Stroud and DeMeco Ryans. The Patriots hope that they have their D'Amico Ryans and Gerard Mayo. And if you hit on the quarterback, then a lot of things can change.
So you mentioned Jaden Daniels, and I'm a big Jaden Daniels guy for obvious reasons.
I know. Yes.
We've texted each other about this, but I'm curious. Do you think some teams just don't want a quarterback who can run like him because it's just you change your offense so much, and there's a lot of unscripted things that happens when you have a good running quarterback, and you don't always get what you want when you call a pass play. Is that sort of your feeling with how most people feel about a running quarterback?
I think the biggest thing with Jaden Daniels that you keep hearing from people that you talk to is he going to have any sort of sense of self-preservation in the league because of the hits that he took in college? And he would scramble and he wouldn't slide, or he wouldn't look to throw. Often he's one of those guys that once he's taking off, he's taking off. He's not an off script guy that's going to then pull it down and find an outlet and get the ball into one of the skill players' hands. He wants to go and run for 50 yards, which I totally understand when you have that kind of ability to do it. I mean, just turn on the Florida game and he just takes off and goes untouched 50 yards to the house through the entire defense. Like it's tempting to just do that on every other time you drop back. I get it. But I think for teams, what they would like to see from Jaden Daniels is not just sliding, but also looking downfield more with his eyes and having his eyes downfield when he does elude pressure. He does get outside the pocket to give the guys the ball that are supposed to have the ball in those situations and let them take the hits and let them try to create down the field and things like that. I think that's the biggest difference that I see with Jaden Daniels compared to like a Drake May, because both of them are mobile. Obviously, Daniels is much more mobile than May is, but May is also somebody that will look to throw the ball off script or off platform. Whereas I see with Jaden, he just wants to take off. And I think that's the biggest question. It's not necessarily about changing the offense and doing all that kind of stuff, but it's more about, is he going to play a little bit more, maybe long-term outlook on things where he is getting the ball out of his hand and he isn't taking as many hits.
Ken Mathias joins the show. Question for you guys, and I think, Evan, you already answered this. If a trade down is what the Patriots could do, are they still looking for a quarterback in the first round, or a guy like Penix, the alternate option in the second round, if he lasts that long? I think you mentioned that as a possibility a couple of minutes ago, if they were in fact to make a trade with Minnesota, that he could be an option at 34.
Yeah, look, I'm saying this completely as my opinion, but I cannot imagine that my bosses would be too happy if we come out of this draft without a quarterback at some point in the let's call it the top 50. Whether it's a guy like Nix or it's Michael Penix in a little bit later on, that's fine, I think. But I can't imagine that they come out of this draft without somebody that they say, we feel like this guy could be our quarterback of the future. Even if it's not a slam dunk thing at number 3 overall, it's maybe someone that's a little bit more of a developmental prospect or something like that. But I would imagine that those day 2 guys, top of day 2 guys, Nix, Penix, maybe even a Spencer Rattler a little bit later if they want to go that route. But one of those guys in the top 50 or top 100 picks is going to be taken by the Patriots at that spot.
Ken, thanks for joining us as always. Greatly appreciated. Now, our good buddy Greg Bedard put something out the other day, Evan, about how he doesn't see any scenario in which 6 quarterbacks go in the first round. If you take the top 3 guys plus McCarthy, Nix, and Penix, you could potentially have 6 that go in the first round. I have said that I've been covering the draft 25 years, and it's very rare to see that many go in the first round. Inevitably, one of those guys slips into the second round. But this is one of those years, though, where it is a possibility you could potentially see 6 guys go in the first round. Is that something that we could potentially expect, or in your opinion, either Nix and or Penix, as you just mentioned, slips into the second round?
Yeah, we've argued about this on Catch 22 with myself and Alex Barth a lot about Penix, because to me, I think he profiles like a top of the second round guy because of the injuries. That's typically where you get, all right, he has first round graded film, but we're not going to use a first round pick on him because he has the injury history and he's a little bit older of a prospect and we have some concerns there. So we're going to wait until the top of the second round and take him early on day 2. I think that's really where he fits into this draft. And I would say with Bo Nix, the thing that you hear so much about Bo Nix is just what's the ceiling on Bo Nix, and he's somebody that is going to be probably in that Andy Dalton, Derek Carr level of type of player where, yeah,
I see a lot of Alex Smith there. I don't know what you
Alex
think.
Smith is, yeah, another good comp. I think, obviously those guys were good quarterbacks, but not MVP caliber quarterbacks. We're not talking about guys that are going to the Hall of Fame or anything like that. So I could see it potentially happening where, we've seen this in the past. I'll never forget the Lamar Jackson draft, the Baltimore Ravens trading back into the end of the first round and taking him at 32. Like, there's a chance that you could see something like that happening where, a team just wants to get ahead of some other teams that might be quarterback needy, and they just jump the line and take one of these guys at the back of the second round, or back of the first round, excuse me. But when you look at the back of the first round, there are not a whole lot of teams, obviously, that are that good that are needing quarterbacks, because they wouldn't be that good if they needed a quarterback. So I think that that's the best case scenario to get 5 or 6 of these guys into the first round, would be a team coming up from the top of the second round on night 1.
If they do take a quarterback, the debate's going to rage on whether he should sit or start right away. Last week, Tom Brady had some interesting comments, and right now you have a bridge quarterback in Jacoby. But let's just hypothetically, if he does unretire, what are your thoughts on that situation? Frankly, I see it as a win-win. The buzz is back in Gillette for ownership, and you now have a kid learning under a guy. I know he's 40, whatever the hell he is, 47, 48, but I think he automatically wins you a few more games than Jacoby does. I don't really see a reason why it would be a bad idea. What do you think about that whole thing, if it would to ever, be a possibility?
Yeah, I'm never going to sit here and say I don't want Tom Brady back on the Patriots. Like, I think that would be foolish for anybody to sit there and say that. But at the same time, I do feel like there's, I don't know, some closure to that situation, especially with the ceremony we have coming up in June with he's going into the Patriots Hall of Fame. So he's going to be a Patriot Hall of Famer, and then he's going to suit up for the Patriots in week 1. It'll be a little bit bizarre, right? So
what would be great, though, I will say this, not to cut you off. What if he comes out that night and announces that he is coming back?
See, that's what I was thinking. Like Roger Clemens in Yankee Stadium.
Oh man, I'm never gonna say no, and I'm never gonna say never, but I just feel like the organization right now is focused on the future, and I think that that's so much about why Gerard Mayo's in his position and Elliott Wolf is in the position he's in, and we're trying to turn a page here from the Belichick era and from the Brady era and the dynasty and all that kind of stuff, and I think what they felt like with the last couple of years with Belichick is they kind of had one foot in, 1 foot out of the dynasty, where it was still Bill, it was still the same program, there was still a lot of the same tenants and people involved and in charge, but there was no Brady, so there was no magic, right? And I think that that's sort of something that they're focused on, is turning the page and starting anew. But if Brady called and Mayo was for it, I'm not going to sit here and say that the door is absolutely shut, because I don't know that.
I was wondering a more kind of general question. Is like, you watch a ton of film, especially this time of year, although really year round, but especially this time of year. Is there a guy that you really, really like that everybody else is sort of lukewarm on? Like, is there a guy that you think could get picked in day 3 that you think could become like a regular starter?
That's a really good question. I think that, just maybe not day 3, because I do think that one thing about this draft that I've kind of, with all the research I've done, because of NIL, because of some of the COVID, holdovers as well, where guys have all this eligibility, the draft really drops off after the 4th round, I would say, where rounds 5 through 7, I can't imagine that a lot of teams are going to have draftable grades on guys that they're picking in the 6th and 7th round. Like, we may be talking about them drafting those guys so they don't have to compete for them in undrafted free agency when the draft is over. I also think a lot of those rounds now are going to be earmarked to special teams type players, developmental special teams guys, especially with the new kickoff rule and stuff like that, where maybe special teams becomes an even bigger factor. I think the Patriots, for all their issues in terms of personnel, and I know, they're one step ahead on special teams. What else is new? But drafting guys like Amir Speed and Isaiah Bolden at the end of the draft last year, I think was them sort of seeing some foreshadowing that the league was going to tweak some things in special teams. So in terms of, the depth of the draft, I don't necessarily love it. But if I had to give you a guy that I just feel like the consensus is a little bit lower on than I am is Austin Booker from Kansas. I tweeted about him today, edge rusher from Kansas, who has 505 career snaps in his collegiate career. That's it. And that's a very, very small sample size. Probably one of the smaller sample sizes I've seen for a guy that could potentially go in the third round. But he's got a ton of rush talent and a ton of length and just really good at using his hands and getting off blocks. I think he's going to be a good player. He might need some for the team that takes him, but giving him to guys like, DeMarcus Covington, Joe Kim, let those guys coach him up a little bit. He's still only 21 years old. I think he's going to be a player that I'm probably going to be a lot higher on. I think I could potentially have him as a top 5 edge guy in this class, and it's all said and done. I know it's stacked at the top, so I don't really count those guys too much because I highly doubt the Patriots are walking out of this draft with Latu Latu or Jared Verse, as good of players as they are. But I really like Booker. I like some of these tackles too. Like a guy like Roger Rosengarten is probably going to still go pretty high. But I think so many people watch the national championship game against Michigan and soured on him. But when you turn on the film with him, you don't really see a whole lot of difference between him and Fatanu, who's on the other side. That's going to probably be a first round pick. Twitchy mover, ran the fastest 40-yard dash at the combine. Really good in a zone scheme. If you're like a zone team, if you're the Niners, you're potentially the Patriots now with their new offense. I think he's a year one starter for you if you're his own team.
You are watching / listening to the New England Football Show, sponsored by Mortgage Right. I'm your host, John Saranitas, and this week we are joined by Patriots.com's Evan Lazar. Just a reminder, if you are in the market to sell your current home or purchase your first home, give Herb Devine a call, 781-254-2846, or shoot him an email at herb@mortgageright.com. With 27 years of experience, Herb has the requisite background to help you get into the right program to purchase your next home. He and his team are available anytime, including nights and weekends. Evan, I want to go back here for a second, and I want to talk about pick number 34 in the second round, which I don't feel like enough people are talking about it as much as they should, because so much of the focus is on pick 3 and what are they going to do there, and are they going to take a quarterback? But when you look at that pick, obviously it has a lot of value. They could potentially keep it and address wide receiver there, or what I'd like to see them do is take an offensive tackle there. There's still going to be enough talent on the board there potentially that they could take an offensive tackle. Of course, there's also been some talk out there that they could potentially use it as a possible trade chip for a number 1 type receiver. What do you think they should do with pick 34, and where do you want to see them go with it?
Yeah, it's obviously a question that, asked me on Friday when I know what the board looks like, right? But I think the biggest thing with pick 34 is that I think that the focus should probably be on a player that's going to make an immediate impact. And as much as I like some of these tackles that could be available on day 2, there's no bigger fan than Kingsley Suamataia than me from BYU. I think that guy's going to be a stud. He's Penny Sewell's cousin, moves like Penny Sewell, just not as seasoned as he is yet. And unbelievable athletic ability on film. Just you ask him to zone block, you ask him to block in space, get out on the screen, obviously pass protect on an island. Like, he can do all those different types of things. He's just got some lapses in technique, and his eyes are not always in the right places, things like that. He's going to be a really good player, but is he going to be a rookie starter for the Patriots? Is he going to be a guy that in week 1 they're going to be able to start right out of the chute? Probably not. So when you start to look at some of these receivers, though, like those guys at 34 are going to make an immediate impact. Like you draft a guy at 34 like Xavier Legette or Lad McConkey or any of those guys, Keon Coleman, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but maybe he ends up panning out. Those guys, I think, have a chance to make an immediate impact on your football team. So I think that's what you have to weigh. Obviously, you have to also weigh what the tackles are going to be like at 68. But I have a feeling that they like what they have in Chukwuekorfor for, at least as a bridge tackle. Obviously, I think they're going to have Mike Onwenu playing right tackle moving forward. So they really are looking at left tackle, I would think. I still like some of those tackles at the top of the second round, but I just wonder if some of those guys they look at as more project type players, whereas the receivers, I mean, this class is just so deep at receiver that you're going to get a ready-made player there at 34.
The only thing I would say to that is, and I agree with you, the only thing I would say, though, is I do think that once you get past the second round, to your point earlier, there is a drop-off there at the offensive tackle position. Where, to your point just now, if you wait until the third round, let's say, and at pick 68, you could take a Jalen Polk potentially, or his teammate McMillan out of Washington, or someone like that, a Roman Wilson possibly. I still think there's going to be enough talent there. I see where you're coming from, and I agree that they may not make the impact that the round two guys, a guy like a Lad McConkey might make, but they're certainly going to have – it's going to be an interesting situation, right? Because you got a guy like Tyler Guyton, who I don't think is going to be there, but what if he falls out of the first round for whatever reason, and he's sitting there at 34? They'll have a pretty interesting conversation internally to try to figure out what they're going to do there.
Yeah, I think Tyler Guyton's a good example of a guy that I probably will have like closer to a second round grade on, maybe like, late first, early second rounder, just because of some of the developmental stuff that he still needs to have. But the position's such a premium that I would be shocked if Tyler Guyton makes it to day two. Like that seems like somebody in the 20s is going to draft him. The one other guy that I would mention in this falling category is a guy like Amarius Mims, who based off the film is like a top 15 player in most drafts, but he has 800 career snaps. Last year was the year he was supposed to start regularly for Georgia, and he has the tightrope surgery on his ankle, misses most of the season. So he doesn't really have a ton of film. And I think as teams, we normally see those types of guys sometimes get knocked a little bit, lack of sample size, lack of durability. Like, why didn't he get on the field sooner? Even at a school like Georgia, if you have this freak tackle who's like 6'8" and 340 pounds and moves like a cyborg, why is this guy not playing sooner for your team? And I think that some teams might look at him as more of like a high second round guy. So
I think we lost you there, Evan. I don't hear your voice.
Yeah, I don't hear him.
You can hear us, right? A little technical difficulty here, and Evan will adjust here. And Stone, you can get your question queued up here for Evan when he's ready.
I've had it. But real quick on.
Am I back?
Oh, we got you.
Yeah,
You're back. You're back.
Sometimes these streams can be a little faulty, who knows?
Yep, it happens. Go ahead, Stone.
Evan, on 34, what are your thoughts on T. Higgins? Obviously, a huge name that's come up regarding, revolving around that pick. I think it's a no-brainer if it can get done, but it doesn't seem like both sides necessarily are in that much of a rush to get it done. Do you think it's an option?
I don't think so because of the Bengals side of things. It certainly sounds like they want to make one more run at it with that core. And obviously, I'm sure that they felt a little bit cheaped out of last year because of the Burrow injury. Like, it wasn't really a year that they got a chance to go after it with those guys. So I think the Bengals are probably going to hang on to T. Higgins and try to make a run at a Super Bowl with Chase and Higgins and Burrow healthy and together again. Brandon Ayuk is another name that, I love Brandon Ayuk. I think he'd be a fantastic get for the Patriots that I would probably trade 34 for as well. As much as I love this receiver class, I would trade the pick for either of those guys. You just don't know. You just never know. And especially with the Patriots in the draft at receiver, I'm I'm not going to ever be sure that they're going to hit on one of these early round receivers until it happens. So I would much rather take the NFL guy, just take the guy that's the proven commodity and make it work, especially with those two players because they're still so young. It's not like you're trading for a Stephon Diggs who's 31 years old. You're trading for guys that are going into their prime. So I would make that move in a heartbeat. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. But I think the one solace you can have if you're a Patriots fan is that it is a really good receiver class. So if they don't make that trade for one of those guys, and they're still probably going to walk away from day two with a really good player at that position.
I'm curious about, I guess, the operation of the thing, and what's who's making the final call on some of these things. I'm curious because we used to know easily who it was. It was all Bill. It was not all Bill, but he was the guy.
Yeah.
What do you know about sort of the operation side of it?
Elliot Wolf's going to make the pick. Elliot Wolf's going to make the pick. And I think there are going to be more voices in the room about who is exactly going to help him make that pick, if you will. But he has not shied away from that, whether, at the podium the couple times that we've talked to him or whatever. He's made it very clear that he's got final say on who they take in the draft. I do think that, there's obviously going to always be those people out there that are wondering how involved ownership is. And the one thing I'll just say to that, in my feeling, is that when you are making a pick like number 3 overall, and you're probably taking a quarterback that's going to be the face of your franchise, all 32 owners are involved with that pick, right? Like it's that those aren't picks that are just made without ownership approval or without ownership being involved in the conversation. I think that that's such a crazy thing. And I'm not just like carrying the water. I just think that's such a crazy thing that people are, the ownership should have no involvement and they should just leave the room and let the football people take care of it. It's like, they're the ones footing the bill, guys. Like it's their football team. Like they're the ones that pay for everything. Obviously it's a business just like any other business that the CEO of the company is going to have final say on these like major company decisions. So when it comes to the pick, I still think from a football perspective, it'll be an Elliot Wolf pick, but there are going to be, Gerard Mayo, obviously ownership that are going to have a pretty strong say in what happens. But if we're talking about, are they going to draft, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, or JJ McCarthy, I think the final, guy that's going to turn in the final card will be Elliot.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to your point, Robert Kraft is going to be involved in this. Like you said, I think all 32 owners would be in this situation. And he made it very clear at the owners' meetings, he wants a quarterback. And that's at that point, you have to think that unless they're blown away with a trade offer, they're gonna stick and pick, to quote Daniel Jeremiah, and take a quarterback at 3. And quite frankly, Evan, and this goes back to what we talked about at the start of the show, Kevin saying he's team trade down. At the end of the day, I think we can all universally agree it's a quarterback-driven league. If you don't have an elite level guy at that position, like they did for 20 plus years, if you don't have an elite level guy at that position, you don't have a chance. We have to be realistic about it. When you look at Bo Nix, you look at Michael Penix, if we're sitting here comparing those guys, as you said, to Andy Dalton or Alex Smith or Jeff Blake, those guys weren't guys that are going to get you to a Super Bowl and win you a Super Bowl. You want to position yourself to end up getting an elite level guy that'll put you in that conversation in 2 or 3 years potentially, if not sooner. And at the end of the day, odds are your chances are better of getting that guy with a top 3 pick than they are at the top of the second round.
Yeah. We did a draft party with season ticket holders that we do every year. Just like a little pre-draft thing where we talk about the players and the prospects. And Devin McCourty was there, and I got to be on a panel with Devin, which was pretty cool. And he said that him and Jason always call it the confetti test. Like, who's the quarterback that if we draft this guy here, that we can envision the confetti falling on us and with hoisting the Lombardi Trophy at the end of all of this. And I think that's where the Patriots are with the pick at number 3. I think everything they've done this offseason, Jacoby Brissett, bringing him in and not only just talking about him as a football player, but also talking about him as a mentor and a locker room guy and somebody, a veteran in the room. I think all of the signs point to that they have consistently made moves to make the quarterback the pick at 3 overall. And I just don't really see how anything has changed between then and now and some of the things that they've said. Who they take, I have no idea, but I would be pretty shocked if they don't stick and pick at 3 and take a quarterback. I think it's going to take, I mentioned that trade offer kind of, tongue in cheek about the Vikings, but I think it's truly going to take something truly monumental to move them off that pick. Like it's going to have to be 3-4 future first round picks and then some. Or I know Mike Reese threw out, maybe it's more something like what the Panthers and Bears did last year where DJ Moore is in the trade, right? And so it's like, a couple first round picks plus a proven veteran player or something like that can help the Patriots in the here and now. It's going to have to take a monumental offer to move them off the pick, I think.
Ev, you and I talked the other day about a few local prospects that I know you saw down at the combine. There's 4 guys here. We have about 50 plus, potential prospects, but 4 guys in particular that I think can help this team: Dylan Wabi, CJ Hansen, Jalen Coker, and Elijah Jones. Just your thoughts on any of them, and if you see them potentially, landing here.
I absolutely loved watching Dylan Lobby at the Senior Bowl. I was in Mobile for a couple of those days of practice, and he was terrific. I really think that he's one of those guys that isn't going to just be a pass catcher either. I think he's got the ability to run the football, probably from sub package. You're not going to run him into loaded boxes on first down and things like that. But when you get into your shotgun offense and you need one of those, change of pace, scat backs, whatever you want to call it, I think that Dylan Lobby is going to fit into that role really nicely. And then he also has the receiving skill, which is always a bonus. So I love Dylan Lobby. I was all over it. When they signed Antonio Gibson, I feel like that maybe went out the door a little bit just because I think they're similar types of players, but I think Lobby's a really good player. And you mentioned, Elijah Jones. I know he's got some of the off-field concerns with him that might push him down the board a little bit, but it's not going to be talent. It's not going to be ability. I think on ability alone, he's probably late 3rd, early 4th round pick to play corner with press man skills, with athleticism, long speed, all of it. So I wonder what teams think of him just in terms of, the interviews and that process and the vetting process. But in general, I think that he's an NFL player 100%.
I don't know if Adam's still with us or he froze or what happened here.
I think he is frozen. I couldn't tell.
I think he is as well. Evan, I wanted to throw out to you the JJ McCarthy talk. Obviously, it's been a topic of conversation, and I think a lot of people are looking at things and saying, okay, there's no way on earth they take him at 3. Now, I've talked to a lot of people that have said to me that people around the league like him more than the media does. What are your thoughts on JJ McCarthy? Is there any chance they take him at 3? We've talked about the potential trade down scenario, but aside from that, do you see him going in the top 10? I think he goes in the top 10. I know a lot of people think he's going to fall to a Denver potentially at 12. I don't see that. I think he goes in the top 10.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that he goes in the top 10 as well. I would just look at between the Vikings, the Broncos, the Raiders. One of those teams I would think is calling the Atlanta Falcons and trying to see what it would take to move up to that pick. Because obviously the Falcons are not taking a quarterback with Kirk there. So I would think that's the most logical JJ McCarthy landing spot. I wrote about JJ McCarthy today, so you can read it on Patriots.com. I knew that it was going to be a polarizing article to post, right? I knew there would be some people on both very, very extreme and angry people on both sides of the spectrum. The guy that I came to in my comparison for him was Brock Purdy, because I just feel like with Purdy, even though I think that there are some significant stylistic differences, the two things about Purdy that always impress me when I watch him are his mobility, like his pocket mobility, to keep plays alive and extend plays with his legs by moving around the pocket, not necessarily the Jaden Daniels type of mobility, but the pocket type of mobility. And then also just that it factor. Like there's just something about him, right? That there's just something about him, that the leadership, the intangibles that guys gravitate towards. And at the end of the day, I just feel like with JJ, I don't hate him as a prospect. I think that he's a fine prospect. But do you look at him and look at what he puts on film and say that guy someday is back to the confetti test? Not just are we going to win the Super Bowl with him on our football team, but are we going to win the Super Bowl because he carried us to the Super Bowl? And I feel like if you're picking at 3 overall and you're taking a quarterback there, you want that quarterback to be somebody that drives the bus to a Super Bowl. It can't just be this Brock Purdy thing where he's got all these great players around him and Kyle Shanahan calling plays, and he's just part of an engine. I that's where I'm at with McCarthy. I just don't see the path to franchise quarterback level. I see a guy that has definitely the ability to be an above average starter and someone that has some of those peak seasons that maybe is, the 8th best quarterback in the league or something like that. But I look at May, I look at Daniels, and I see 2 guys that have a much clearer path to being MVP caliber. Whereas with JJ, I think he's kind of a step below that. And, the biggest reason why to me on tape with him is accuracy. He's as sporadic, I think, at times with his accuracy as Drake May is, but he doesn't have that big arm and the off script ability and some of the crazy downfield throws that Drake May has. It's a lot more in the middle of the field. And one of the things that you look at just analytically too with quarterbacks, if you're like focused on one hot spot of the field, like this is the only area of the field where he's really, really highly proficient, then defenses in the NFL figure that out really quickly. So a guy like JJ, he's a really, really good thrower between the numbers. But outside the numbers, when he has to drive the ball outside the numbers and deep, his efficiency goes way, way down. When he gets into the league, teams are going to figure that out really quickly. And they're going to be playing different types of coverages that are going to funnel the ball to the outside the number area and the down the field areas. A lot like what happened with Mac Jones after his rookie season, where they figured out that if we take away the inside of the field and we force him to push it outside, he doesn't have the arm to get it out there. And I don't necessarily worry about JJ's arm in that respect, but I worry about the accuracy and the timing and the ability to get the football outside the numbers and put it in the right places. So I'm not there with JJ McCarthy as some other people are, but I understand that the league, the intangibles, he's got enough physical tools to get you to buy into it. I doubt that he's going to last very long in the first round.
Evan, I don't know if this question was asked while I was gone. My computer just cut out. But speaking of Michigan guys, there's 2 local guys from Michigan who are in this draft who I've heard good things about from everybody. Like really, like I have not, and I saw these guys when they were in high school, great players. That'll be defensive back Mike Sanders still, and offensive guard or lineman Zach Zinter. Have you seen those guys much, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Sanders is one of my favorite players in the draft, and that's not just because I live in Everett and he's from Everett. Okay, like it goes deeper than that. But actually, just a little quick story. We were flying back from the combine, Mike Dussault and I, and Mike Sanders' parents were on our flight. Which was pretty cool. So we had a whole conversation with them and got to chat with them a lot. And his dad was like, first round. I was like, maybe not first round, but I think he's going to go pretty early. And he's like, nah, he's going first round. I was like, okay, like I know it's your son. I'm not going to tell you anything differently, but I actually, I really love him though on film. I just think when you look at corners, the 2 things that I always look for are feistiness. Like I just want the guy to be aggressive, and I want the guy to have, play with a certain level of aggression to his game. And the other thing that I really love about him is how fluid he is in man coverage. He's going to be able to stick with guys in man coverage, inside, outside. You can put him on the slot. I think that's probably where he's going to be long-term is nickel. That's totally fine. But I think in the NFL, with such a matchup-based league, when they have teams that are going to play some of their slot guys more on the perimeter at times, I think he could travel outside with certain body types. I'm not putting him out there against the bigger receivers, but if you are facing a Miami team and Jalen Waddle decides to, run some routes on the outside, I think that he can follow him out there just fine. But I love his downhill trigger. I love how physical he is for his size. He's got an ability to hold up in the run game for that size. That's really pretty impressive. So if I'm the Patriots, it's probably not, that makes the most sense for them to take a corner that early. But I look at like Jonathan Jones, 30, 31 years old at this point, coming up on a contract year. Is Sanders still a guy that could just take the mantle from Jonathan Jones and run with it? I think he could.
Yeah, and it's hard to believe, when we covered him in high school. I mean, it's hard to believe that he's playing corner, because when we covered him in high school, he was such a dynamic skill guy, receiver. You can run him on jet and fly sweeps, perimeter screens. He was such an elite playmaker, and now here we are 5 years later talking about him as a cornerback. Evan, I did want to ask you, and we got about 7 minutes left. I did want to ask you, obviously, there's other needs here beyond just quarterback, offensive tackle, and secondary. I mean, you mentioned cornerback. I think that's a bigger need for them than people think. Another area that could be a potential concern to me is running back. Ramondre Stevenson going into into the last year of his contract. You signed Antonio Gibson to a 1-year deal. Earlier, we talked about Dylan Lobby, but do you see running back as being a position that they should address, especially, let's say, early in day 3?
Yeah, I think they can always use running backs. I'm not a big running backs guy in terms of taking them early in drafts. I feel like you have to have a guy that's a really, Christian McCaffrey level difference maker to take running backs that high. But in terms of where you should take running backs, 4th, 5th round, I mean, I would take running backs every year in that area of the draft. Simply just because of the value. And I think a lot of teams in this draft, there aren't any of those Christian McCaffreys in this draft. So I think that there's going to be a run on running back at some point where you could see a bunch of them go in a span of picks. And it's just going to be, don't watch the parade go by, right? Like you're going to have to jump on the parade float at some point and take your guy. So, a couple of guys that I think are interesting for the Patriots. I love Marshawn Lloyd from USC. I think he's got that ability to be a real big play threat, both in the pass game and as a runner as well. Would be a nice little pair with Ramondre Stevenson. He's more of, a faster, more explosive back than Ramondre, and Ramondre's bigger. So you give some of that, yin and yang, or, whatever you want to call it. I think the other guy that is so them from, the Belichick era, so I don't know how much of weight this holds now, but Braylon Allen from Wisconsin is just that big bulldozing running back, 225, 230, very, LeGarrette Blount-esque. And I think that if, Bill was still here, I would be saying that this is 100%, a Patriots type of guy that they would take at that position, just a bowling ball that can run people over. So if they're looking for that early down role, which I think is probably what they will be looking for, because they have Antonio Gibson now to play the 3rd down role, I would think that a guy like Braylon Allen would be a traditional Patriots fit. We'll see how much that changes now moving forward.
I like Godric Estime, too, from Notre Dame. I think
he's an angry
your point
guy.
About a bigger back, he could be a fit.
Yeah, he's an angry guy, too. I've seen some quotes from him, that he just wants to run through people's faces and stuff like that. You always like hearing running backs that just want to run downhill. I think that's the one knock on Marshawn Lloyd, is that, he doesn't necessarily finish runs as well as he could. You will not have that issue with Estime. He's going to run through some people.
Evan, last one for me. We're supposed to talk to Elliot Wolf on Thursday. Do you think their decision will be made? And I'm not saying we're going to get any info or anything like that, but internally, do you think their decision is made by Thursday, or is it made already in terms of what they're doing with number 3?
You have to think that Elliot Wolf has an inkling of what he's going to do with that pick. I just can't imagine the amount of time that we all spend thinking about this kind of stuff. I'm sure he thinks about it twice as much as the rest of us do. So I would have to think that he has an inkling of what he's going to do with the pick. 30 visits end on Wednesday. That's the deadline, the last day that you can have people at the facility. You can obviously talk with prospects between the draft and then, but in terms of having them in person at your facility, Wednesday is the deadline. So I would think after that, that's when you sort of regroup and get with everybody and sort of start to really finalize your board. So by Thursday, it's possible. I'm sure they start at the top and make their way down. So I would say on Thursday, it's probably possible that he'll know who he really likes. So I guess we'll see, because as much as they aren't going to come out and say it, they are picking 3, and it's not like there's like 17 different things that they could do, So I don't think if the Commanders don't really care and the Patriots don't really care, I wouldn't be surprised if we start to hear who's picking who by the time maybe next week at some point.
This is sort of a lighthearted one, but like, is there a favorite draftees word or phrase, like twitchy or upside or anything like that? Is there a favorite like draft word in your lexicon?
Okay, so this is one that I learned this year because I was reading. I wish I could give the credit to the person. I can't think of the top of my head, but I was reading a story on Caleb Williams, and he throws the ball from so many ridiculous arm angles that it just, how do you describe it? So the person described it as arm elasticity, right? Like he's like Mr. Elastic, that he can just like throw it from any angle or any arm angle or platform or whatever. So arm elasticity has been my new favorite one of this draft season. Just guys that can drop it down, can throw it 3/4, throw it over the top, and just flick it 60 yards like Caleb Williams. So that guy's crazy. that guy's film is absolutely insane. So yeah, it was fun watching him, at least, when it was a little bit of a pipe dream back in like December and January when I was first starting this. I did pop on some Caleb Williams and came up with that. So that's pretty cool.
Before we wrap up here, quick question. Ken Mathias checks back in with the Patriots. Look at a guy like Blake Corum, if he's available day 2 or 3. See, to me, I think Corum would fit Patriots teams of the past as that proverbial third down back, but I don't think we saw enough out of him at Michigan in the passing game to assume that he could develop into that. Now, James White did. James White didn't do a ton in the passing game in Wisconsin either, but what are your thoughts on that, Evan?
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably have Blake Corum as their number 1 running back in the draft. I know, Benson from Florida State's in that running as well, probably. And everybody's got their own flavor, I would say, in this draft. It's not, like I said earlier, there's no surefire, top first round guy. So it's a flavor draft with this position. And I agree with you with Blake Corum that he's just a certain type of back that has some power to him that I think is surprising, for his size, and certainly has that nose for the end zone. We have like something ridiculous, like 30 career touchdowns or something like that at Michigan. So he's got that ability to find the end zone and run the ball between the tackles. But sometimes I'll admit, you watch that Michigan offense and the running lanes that these guys have to run through. You're like, this is not going to be what it's like in the NFL. So that's one thing with Blake Corum that I'm wondering a little bit, is like, those tractor trailer sized holes that he's running through at Michigan at times. As good as he is at the second and third level, and I think that's probably what his best part of his game is, in the open field. But he gets into the open field pretty easily.
Yeah. And certainly his size will be a concern. I agree. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's 5'7" and change, 180, 185 pounds. I mean, that's you're not at that size. It's hard to last long in the NFL. Very few guys have done it. Real quick before we wrap up here, Evan, you mentioned Caleb Williams. I wanted to get your thoughts on him real quick, even though the Patriots are not going to be in the running for him. He's going to go to Chicago, number 1. I'm one of the few people out there that have heard. I'm one of the few people out there, I should say, that doesn't buy into this notion that he's a generational talent. I don't see that. I think he's at his ceiling. I think you're either going to get a top 5 guy or he's going to flame out within 5 years. That's just my take on him. We're both Drake May guys, so we're on the same page here.
Yeah.
What do you think of Williams?
Yeah, I don't know. I go back and forth on using the word generational, because I was on a show with Paul Perillo on Patriots Unfiltered, and I remember like making a comment about Marvin Harrison Jr. being generational, and Paul looked at me and he was like, well, when's the last time that a receiver prospect was as good as Marvin Harrison Jr.? And I was like, I don't know, like Jamar Chase. And he was like, that was 3 years ago. Like, I don't know if that qualifies as generational, And I was like, yeah, that's a good point. So I don't know. I hear you that I think generational is depends on,
because we heard that with Trevor Lawrence. he hasn't been generational.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the definition of generational. I think looking back on it, we were all probably a little bit too jazzed up about Lawrence because of the year before he was drafted, which is similar to what the situation is with Caleb, where the Heisman season was not his draft season. So that also makes it tough because if he comes out from his Heisman season, then I think that might have changed how we saw things. But last year we did see some regression and we did see some more flaws on his film. I think the biggest thing with his film is just there are some, propensity for turnovers, like holding on to the ball, ball security in the pocket. He does fumble quite a bit. And he does take a lot of sacks and he does hold the ball forever. So those things are either going to, he's either going to run around like Mahomes and he's going to figure it out and he's going to be unstoppable, or those are going to be things that continue to creep up for him on an NFL field. But in terms of arm talent and also just, I would say release quickness and arm angles and, arm elasticity, you can bring it back. Like those things are just off the charts to me with Caleb. And I do think that he creates on script or in structure a little bit more than he gets credit for. So I'm pretty high on him. Like I think that he's an all-pro caliber talent, MVP caliber guy all day. Was he generational? I mean, I wouldn't necessarily put him in like the Andrew Luck, category. I don't think I'm ever going to see a guy like Andrew Luck again, who is so can't miss that even the Colts couldn't mess him up. Like it was just this like perfect quarterback. So I wouldn't necessarily put him in that category, but I think he's right there with Trevor. Like I think that those two guys are going to end up being in similar caliber tiers.
Well, Evan, I want to say thank you for taking the time. We greatly appreciate it, man. It's great to see you, and we'll see you up there on Thursday.
Absolutely, anytime, guys.
Thanks, Evan.
All right.
Thanks, Evan. Good seeing you
Good
again,
talking
bro.
to you. Yeah, good to see you, Adam.
All right. That is Evan Lazar from Patriots.com. That'll do it for this week's episode of the New England Football Show. For Kevin Stone and Adam Kirkchin, for Evan Lazar, I'm John Sirenitas. Till next week. Peace.
See ya.